In England, you can find heritage anywhere, something beautiful to look at or historically interesting. To test that point, we're going to be using this dart to throw it in a map of the county we're in, Somerset, and wherever it lands, we're going to go within 3 or 4 miles of that point and see what we can find. Heritage hunting in Somerset today. I'm going in blindfolded, so this isn't bias. Where did it go? Oh wow, okay. So we are going to, let's just pull that out. It's a little place called Oath, but I know that there's an amazing church at Curry Rivel, or I've got a feeling there is. Hewish Episcopi has an amazing tower. I don't know how far this is though, we'll have to get the scale. What did I say, 3 or 4 miles? We'll see what our radius is, see what we can find. I'm the Luke Littler of Heritage. For those who don't follow darts, he's the 16-year-old darting phenomenon. Pretty pleased with the first shot. It's about an hour drive from where we are. We are right on the east side of Somerset here, and it's going to be about an hour. I've already recognised on the map a couple of villages nearby to where we're going that have historic churches. Going to do a bit of research and get off, so yeah, join us, see what we can find. Okay, so we got 42 minutes to go until we get to the point at which the dart landed. Typically Somerset though, we were just stuck behind that tractor. We've done a little bit of research, honestly like 5 minutes, but I know that there are a couple of places that are within roughly 4 miles that are worth seeing of where we landed. Hewish Episcopi, there's an amazing church tower there. Curry Rivel, I don't know exactly what's there, it's just in my mind from maybe reading some guidebooks, I don't know, many years ago, but Curry Rivel, I've got a good feeling about it. It means something to me, I could be wrong, and then we'll see if there's any random little churches, chapels, houses, maybe there's an old pub, I don't know, we'll see what I can find. The weather today is absolutely dreadful, but it's been filth for about a week now here in Somerset and actually across the whole of the British Isles. Storm after storm rolling in. It was just torrential rain, now the sun's out, I'm sure there'll be rain, it's grey, it's Britain, it's winter, but we'll deal with it and yeah, let's see what we can find. We've driven for 40 minutes and we're at our first location on this heritage hunting challenge. This is Hewish Episcopi and we've got doubly lucky because the sun is now out and this is one of the best church towers in the country. I've known about it for years, I've seen photos, I've been nearby, but I've never been to explore this church in person. Somerset is famed for its towers, usually 15th century, and they are iconic in this flat levels landscape of Somerset. So yeah, let's take a further look. I don't know whether the church will be open, but we can definitely see the tower, so that'll be something. It's got 4 tiers. Let's take a look. This iconic church tower was built around 1500. It rises in 4 tiers of pinnacles and decoration, around 99 feet specifically, though some round it to 100 feet. It's in the perpendicular Gothic style, built of that distinctive local Somerset hamstone. And this is the style of architecture that Somerset is famed for. It's church towers in the perpendicular Gothic style, born out of the wealth, the agricultural wealth, the wool wealth of that period of time. But this church actually has much older origins than the 15th century. So let's take a look inside. When heritage hunting, you have to look for the signs to identify the age of a church, but this sign is pretty clear. Just look at that Norman doorway. It's semicircular shape, it's distinctive decoration, likely to be 12th century, and it indicates that this church was here long before that iconic West Tower went up, and what a beauty it is. So we just met a pilgrim coming out of this church who is also a folklore author. So that was, as she described, quite an auspicious meeting. We had a good chat. Now to see what's inside. Let's take a look. Okay. Let's see what we can identify. So this is quite old school. There's a binder here, a historical guide to the church. Most churches in England actually have a little A5 sort of guidebook put together by local community or expert, but this one they have a binder. So let's see what's inside it. The first page is a floor plan of the church, and this is really helpful because it helps us to date the different parts of the church. You see the tower, 15th and 16th century. Where we came in, the Norman door there, marked as 12th century. It seems like a lot of the work took place in the 14th century, including the quite large chancel and parts of the nave, which we're standing in. And then there's been various additions over time, post-medieval, the vestry. Let's take a look around then, the basics of the church, and then see if there's any specific details. There are a few items in this church which are of particular interest beyond the West Tower, which, by the way, we've just read was on the 9p stamp in 1972, just in case you're wondering quite how iconic that tower is. One of the items that is of particular interest is this sculpture here. Some think this may be a Saxon sculpture, which used to be on the outside of the church before this transept was added in the 15th century. Therefore, it's quite weathered, but it's been protected from the elements for quite some time now. Often in Anglican churches, in the Church of England, you will find royal coat of arms. This is to indicate after the Reformation that the monarch was the head of the church in England, therefore their coat of arms was placed in a prominent position. Here at Hewish Episcopi, we see a coat of arms to Charles II, dated 1672. Finally, above this handsome Jacobean pulpit, you'll see something that is quite common in parish churches as well, a door that seemingly goes nowhere. Now, there would have been, before the Reformation and the iconoclasm that followed, a large screen across here, what is called a rood screen. On the rood would have been a cross with Jesus, probably John the Baptist and Mary either side, and you would have walked up the stairs. There is a door just around here, and you'd have walked up the stairs to be able to go across the rood beam. There may have been singers there in certain ceremonies throughout the year, religious occasions. So now, often in churches, you get this door, which is just seemingly to nowhere and often confuses people. I've actually heard a lot of people in churches mentioning, well, why is that there? But that is why. A lot of historic churches in England have these visitors' books. It's always important to sign them. You see this one's full of signatures, and that helps the authorities here showcase just how valuable this church is to people when making funding applications and such likes. So if you can just throw your name in and leave some nice comments for the people, it's always worthwhile doing. This is Curry Rivel on New Year's Eve. A quiet little place in the middle of Somerset, but it looks extraordinary. Those windows, perpendicular Gothic again, just always the way in Somerset, or usually. This church was built in 1500, just like the tower at Hewish Episcopi. And at the top of the tower are some grotesque sculptures, what are known locally in Somerset as hunky punks, which I always liked the sound of that phrase. I really appreciate the light quality that you can see already being filtered into the interior through these quite elegant perpendicular Gothic windows. But we've just read that there's some monuments inside that are worth taking a further look at. We've just come inside. Sam, the filmer, has had to remind me that my mic is on at all times, but I was just muttering to myself on the far side of the churchyard, oh, it's beautiful, it's so beautiful. So it could have been worse. We've come inside though because it's started raining again. It's literally raining every 10 minutes and then it's not and then it is. The porch has this wonderful vaulted ceiling, absolutely stunning, and I think that's a sign of what's to come inside. St Andrews has a more traditional guidebook, a nice little one put together, no doubt, by the local committee, and it outlines details of this quite large and decorative tomb, the Jennings Monument, which carries the effigies of father and son who died in 1625 and 1630 respectively. It says that they lived in the big house at Burton Pynsent, a mile to the west, which was later owned by William Pitt the Elder. And as well as the effigies, it has a common feature, these weepers, these mourners below, which are probably the children and relations of the two main effigies. I'm now standing in the North Chapel, which is thought to be the oldest part of the church building. Although the main fabric is around 1500, there was a church here before, and parts of this space are thought to be around 13th century, though the windows were later modernised. The reason I've brought us here is because you can see just a little sign that there are 14th and 13th century monuments behind what is now a food bank. Now, some people might think that those should be on display, but obviously in the UK we're facing troubled economic times. A lot of people are in financial difficulty, and the community is providing a space here for people to be able to access nutrition. It's a sad state of affairs that is the situation we're in. That's common up and down the country. I think rural poverty is often hidden. I think people have a bucolic idea of the English countryside. I'm sure I'm guilty in propagating that. But this is the reality, that these churches are being used for really valuable community purposes. I wish that wasn't the case, and that people had a fair living on which they could provide their families with the nutrition they and the country so obviously need. But that's where we are. In the nave, the pews are Victorian, but the bench ends themselves look to me far older. I actually thought they might be late medieval. The guidebook says they're Elizabethan, and they have some interesting carvings on. There's a head here. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but I always love this aged wood in Old English churches. I'm including this detail for any foreign viewers because I think if you're in England or Britain more generally, you're quite used to seeing these boards with vicars and rectors on them, and they go way back in history. So you see this one starts in 1257 with simply Stephen, and then 1266 Walter Daubney. And I love looking through these boards to see who was here the longest, who was in service the longest, and seeing the names change over time is really fun. But I think it's astonishing, particularly for people who live in North America, that history. Probably in Europe people are used to it. So we've taken a detour to a church at Langport because Sam, the filmer, was doing some research and found out this was apparently, allegedly, the best stained glass in Somerset. So we're gonna see if we can verify whether that's true or not, or could be true. I've not seen all the stained glass in Somerset. So yeah, one more church for you. Let's go. Okay, this is the church at Langport. Judging by what else we've seen today, I imagine it was built around 1500, but let's take a look at that. But there's actually a board in the churchyard with some historic facts. I want to check that out before we go into the church itself. The historic board here is providing information about Walter Baggot. I presume that I'm pronouncing that right. He was an essayist, a journalist, and a political thinker in the 19th century. And I think his name has probably faded slightly from our memory now, but it is an indicator of his influence that actually the former President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson, then a professor at Princeton University, actually paid a visit here whilst on a cycling trip to Britain. And on the 12th of August 1896, he wrote to his wife Ellen Wilson from Langport, saying that Langport is the place where Bagot was born and lived. His grave is in the churchyard here, and in the church there is a beautiful memorial window to him, put in by his wife, who still lives at the family place here when she is not in London. The view from the churchyard here is actually quite startling at the moment. You can see the flooding in all of these fields. We're in what's called the Somerset Levels here, an area of flat land that once would have been a great storm-absorbing wilderness, a marshland, and has been gradually drained over the centuries and turned into rich agricultural land. Usually these churches and villages stand on what would have been thought of as islands within the levels, and as the climate changes, there is more and more flooding coming back to these areas, and I think it is going to be very difficult over the coming decades and centuries for these areas. You can very much see that here now with the flooding below. Thankfully, I don't think it's caused as many problems this year as it has in the past, but who knows, there's still a lot of winter to go. Okay, so I have no idea how I didn't know about this church. It's actually a Churches Conservation church. Churches Conservation is an organisation that generally looks after churches that are redundant. Now they're only used partially for services, sometimes not at all. And yeah, it's a fantastic organisation. Check out their website. Their churches are usually amazing because they've kind of been left untouched for a certain period of time. I just poked my head inside, and just from an initial look, I'm so excited to find out more. Here we go. I'm very pleased to see the Churches Conservation Trust has created one of these paddle boards. This is very old school way of guiding visitors around a church. On one side it has the footprint with the dates of when different architectural periods were constructed, and then points of interest which are also shown on the map, and you kind of walk around following that. So let's do that now. So that window there, the glass, is dedicated to Walter Bagot. I might be getting his name totally wrong, but economists will definitely know more about him and are probably outraged at me not knowing. And then it goes up into that amazing high fan vaulted ceiling dating from the 15th century. Tucked away, we have what's called a tympanum. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. I just see these words in books, to be honest. It's 12th century. I don't think you're going to be able to see it because it's really dark in here. But it's got the Agnus Dei in the middle, which is the Lamb of God, and it's being held up by two angels, and either side what look like bishops to me, possibly saints of the church. This is the oldest part of this building and quite special. We're racing against the clock a little bit. This is the darkest time of the year, just after the winter solstice. We've only got about an hour or so of light left, and I think what this trip shows, with this is our third church, is that honestly you could spend hours in each church finding out every detail, you know, which saints are there. There's this object here which really intrigues me, which looks like a hunky punk which probably fell down from the tower at some point. I don't know, that maybe there's more information about it. There's just so much in small little areas of England. This is just a tiny slice we've visited today, and we're already missing stuff off. So we threw that dart and wondered if there would be anything for us to see. And actually there's too much for an afternoon. There's probably too much for a whole week of searching and research around these buildings. And we're just visiting the churches. I mean, there'll be old cottages, historic pubs, there might be stories about the landscape, etc., that we're just kind of missing out. But this was a first run. Really hope you like this idea, this kind of heritage hunting challenge. Maybe we'll do some more in different counties or different parts of Somerset as we go on. Okay, so now we're going to a place called Aller, which is about a 6-minute drive away, and I have literally no idea what's there. All I've seen on the map is it says church, and sometimes that's enough. I often do this if I'm on holiday or I'm traveling for work or something. I'll just visit a place and see what we can find. So this isn't from any guidebook, any prior knowledge. It could be not that interesting, but you never know. So let's see what we can find. To the ancient church. Off we go. Pull up. See what we can find. We're in Aller now, but this is actually just a tiny hamlet. I mean, I actually think there's one, maybe two farmhouses and a farm behind it. And here's the church, very isolated. It looks almost Victorian, but it says it's an ancient church, and maybe the tower's a lot older. Let's see if we can find out the dates of it all. It's really, really windy now. It's New Year's Eve. It's getting towards dark. There's rain coming down every 5 minutes. So I think this is going to have to be the last visit of this heritage hunting challenge. What's funny is we realised that Hewish Episcopi Church and Langport are literally 30 seconds apart. We did a massive loop and went around. So it's really strange to have two amazing churches in such a short, small proximity. Actually, come over here, Simon, just look at the landscape over here. You'll see how flat it is, and then the rising hills. Maybe get an idea of how bad the weather is. Is it dark in here? I don't know how much we're going to be able to film in here because it is so gloomy. I can really hear the wind whipping and lashing this building now. The last person to visit here was on Boxing Day, and they'd come from Studio City, California. Before that, no one had visited for a month, and the 25th of November. So this one is a little bit more out of the way. I don't know where the light switches are. You can see here the effigy of a knight, probably 14th century. I'm not sure. Let's have a look at that in research after we've done this trip, and maybe I'll do a piece to camera. I also read that this church is really closely associated with Alfred the Great, who famously escaped to the Somerset Levels when he was pushed back by the Vikings. It's here that he gathered his forces, fought back against the Vikings, and actually converted their leader at the time to Christianity, a really important moment in English history. And it's said that actually that leader, whose name was, I'm just checking this, although I did watch Simon Sharma's History of England the other day, Guthrum, came accompanied by 30 of his men to be baptised into Christianity at a place near Athelney called Aller. So I think that Guthrum was probably, baptised into the church near here. Was it here? I don't know. I need to do more reading on that, but there is actually a window to Alfred the Great just over here as well. There we go. That's obviously a much later window, probably 20th or 19th century, I don't know. Let's see. Okay. Right, so I've just read that this font is called the Guthrum font. So certainly some people, or the legend has it, that Guthrum was baptised into Christianity in this font way back in 1878. And this is sort of England before England, England in Genesis, but a really, really important moment in our history. And I'm just reading here that it's been claimed that a font in the church was recovered from the rectory pond in the 19th century, and that was the one used to baptise Guthrum. The church can be tricky to find, which we know, and then actually the author just goes on to say how to find it, but anyway, we're here now. I mean, I have no idea. I mean, I imagine this is apocryphal, but it certainly looks like a really old font. By the way, it's not unusual for these fonts to have sort of been disposed, used in farmyards, it's amazing hearing the stories of where they were dug up and found and then put back into the churches in the 19th and 20th centuries. It is so grim outside. We're calling it a day. The dark is descending quickly. Inside this gloomy church, we can hardly see anything with our eyes, never mind the camera. We'll have to read more about the age of this church. It's confusing me a little bit, but I can barely see anything. We're off to find somewhere for a New Year's Eve pint before we head home. Just one, of course. Yeah, thanks for following. Hope you enjoyed the first ever Heritage Hunting Challenge. I don't know if that name will stay, but let's see. Let us know in the comments if you enjoyed this format, what you would like us to do next, where we could go next. We kind of did this at the last minute. It was just a quick idea me and Sam had whilst we were probably having a pint before, actually. Yeah, but I've enjoyed it anyway.